So here's another something that I picked up in Super Bloom that I cannot believe I had missed before your book. And I don't know if this is original to you, if you picked it up from some other people, I'm not sure. But how do new communication technologies often lead to catastrophe? The way you walk through how these technological breakthroughs in communications precede major conflicts and wars was shocking to me as somebody who spent my entire life studying war and conflict. I had never put two and two together before.
It was eye-opening to me, and in many ways it kind of I was trying to make sense of this, what seemed to be this conflict between people's idealism about communication as a tool for building understanding, and the fact that if you look at history, while the telegraph arrives and the telephone and radio and TV, you don't see this outpouring of understanding. You see lots of wars and lots of conflicts, including horrible ones. And it was in reading about the outbreak of the First World War that it did kind of crystallize things, because you have people like Marconi, the inventor of radio, right, proclaiming in 1912 that this would be the end of war, because how could we have war when everybody can communicate so quickly with one another? And then, of course, 1914 comes along, and you have the outbreak of the First World War. And if you read the history, you find that rather than deterring us from going to war at that point, actually the new communication technologies of the telephone and the telegraph actually seemed to hasten the arrival of the war. And what happened is that the Archduke of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo. There were lots of tensions in Europe at the time anyway. And because all the different capitals and governments could now instantaneously communicate with each other, the new wires of communication were kind of overwhelmed with threats, with misunderstanding, and things broke down very, very quickly. And as one British diplomat said at the time, diplomacy is this human art where diplomats travel from capital to capital, they sit down together, they talk things through. And all of that was bypassed by the new communication technologies. And so it kind of undermined diplomacy and did exactly the opposite of what everybody thought. And it does seem to me that there's an important lesson there. Unfortunately, I don't think we learned that lesson, certainly for the remainder of the last century.
You also mentioned in there that it made mobilization a lot faster. So right, these events could spin out of control. I mean, I'm working through Christopher Clark's The Sleepwalkers right now. Of course, Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August. I mean, many other books on how this catastrophe of World War I happened. And I never thought about it from a communications perspective. And I was just teaching a course here at Beeson Dividend School in Cultural Apologetics, and we teased this out from your book, and we applied it then to World War II. And we thought about the role that that television had played in the rise of Hitler, of being able to show off not only his speeches, but then also all of the Nazi marches and parades, those spectacles made for TV, along with the radio that Goebbels and others had used so effectively. Right. So the same thing that they were using, so effectively was the same thing that Roosevelt had mastered for the fireside chats back in the United States. So just not thought about that before.
Yeah. And in fact, the Nazis, one of the first things they did was they invented a cheap radio that could only tune into their own stations, and it became ubiquitous in the country. And so they realized, I think, and they talked about, mass media as a tool for changing the thinking of the entire country. And they used it, unfortunately, very effectively.